Usually, when you or I buy something, especially something that costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Mhm.
there is this fundamental expectation of visibility.
Right, yeah. You want to see what you're paying for.
Exactly. Think about buying a car. You walk onto a lot, you see the sticker price printed right there on the window, you kick the tires, you take it for a test drive,
Yeah.
you know exactly what you're getting. And you know that, like, millions of other people can go out and buy that exact same car.
Well, because it's a tangible, known quantity, right? I mean, the manufacturer designed that car for a statistical average of the population.
Right.
They assumed a normal range of heights, a standard driving environment, and they just built something that works pretty well for almost everybody. There's a deep comfort in that predictability.
There really is. But when you look at the digital backbone of the global economy, that visibility it completely vanishes.
Oh,
I
totally.
mean, a staggering portion of the world's software is completely invisible to the public.
Mm,
You can't download it from an app store.
yeah.
There's no pricing page on some slick startup website,
Yeah.
and it is never ever used by anyone outside of the single company that originally paid for it to be built.
Yeah, we are talking about the hidden multi-billion-dollar shadow industry of custom bespoke software development.
Yes, and it's huge.
It's massive. These are the literal operating systems of global supply chains. They're the massive claims processing engines for multinational insurers.
Right, or highly specific inventory networks for specialized retailers.
Exactly. And none of this exists on a shelf. Every single line of code was negotiated, contracted, and written for one specific buyer.
So today, for this deep dive, we are going to explore the hidden economics, the intense board of negotiations, and the surprisingly catastrophic risks of this shadow industry.
It gets pretty wild.
It really does.
Yeah.
The goal isn't just to understand the technical side of how this invisible software gets built, but the fascinating business mechanics that govern it. Because, well, the rules in this world are totally backward from what you normally expect in the tech sector.
They really are. And, as we pull this industry apart, the biggest realization is that the most dangerous bugs in custom software aren't actually in the code at all.
Wait, really? Where are they?
The real bugs, the ones that literally bankrupt companies, they're hiding in the contracts.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the name itself. The industry literature constantly uses the term bespoke development.
Yeah.
And I love this framing because it borrows directly from traditional tailoring, right? Back in the day, a garment was bespoken, literally spoken for by a single customer long before the tailor even took a pair of shears to the cloth.
It's the perfect analog, honestly. I mean, whether you call it bespoke software, custom development, or customized professional services, it's all exactly the same thing.
Which is what, functionally?
It's the construction of a software system fitted entirely to the constraints of a single commissioning client. And crucially, it's sold as a service, not as a product.
Okay, let me build on that tailoring analogy for a second, because I think it really clarifies the core economic problem here.
Go for it.
So if I go to a department store right now and buy a ready-made suit off the rack, it's manufactured to fit statistical bodies, right? The size chart is just population percentiles.
Right. Small, medium, large.
Exactly. It fits me decently enough. It
Yeah.
would probably fit you decently enough.
But a made-to-measure bespoke suit is cut exclusively for one single body's exact measurements. It accommodates, your specific shoulder slope, your exact arm length.
Right.
It fits you perfectly. But the consequence of fitting you perfectly is that it is going to fit nearly everyone else on the planet terribly.
Right. The economic trade-off here is absolute.
Exactly. Fit and transferability are inversely related. Every measurement the tailor takes for you is information being physically built into the suit that makes it completely wrong for the next customer.
The goodness for one person makes it useless to everyone else.
Yeah.
So translating that to the digital world, where do these measurements actually live in a piece of software? If I'm commissioning an app, where is that digital fabric being cut specifically for me?
Well, those measurements are woven into 4 distinct layers of the code base. The first is domain logic.
Okay, meaning what?
These are your company's highly specific business rules. Let's say you run a wholesale business. Your internal approval hierarchy might require 2 senior managers to sign off on any discount over 15%.
Okay, seems normal.
But wait, only on Tuesdays because that's when inventory is calculated?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. You can't just put a weird rule like that into a tidy settings menu. It has to be hard-coded deep into the system's logic. A competitor in your exact same industry will run on a completely different set of rules.
So if I try to sell my software to my competitor, their entire management team would just be paralyzed because the software is enforcing my Tuesday discount rule.
Exactly. They wouldn't be able to function.
That makes total sense.
Okay.
What's the next layer where these measurements live?
Integrations. I mean, a bespoke system does not live in a vacuum. It has to be fitted to your specific and often incredibly messy digital landscape.
Like plugging into existing stuff.
Yeah, the new software has to tie into your modern ledger package, your employee identity directory, and probably some ancient warehouse controller running on an undocumented protocol from 1998.
Oh man, the legacy systems.
Yeah. Engineering those seams takes massive effort, and those seams are entirely worthless to any other company because literally no one else has your exact Frankenstein combination of ancient and modern tech.
I can just imagine the frustration of a developer spending 3 months getting a beautiful new app to talk to a 20-year-old database, knowing that work can never be reused.
Oh, it happens every day. Now, the third layer is the data and process shape.
Process shape.
Yeah, this means the schemas, the workflows, the literal screens that mirror how your specific organization names things and moves work from desk to desk.
Like the internal jargon?
Exactly. If your company calls them client success representatives and routes all complaints through them first, the software reflects that. A mirror of your company is simply not portable to a company with a different organizational chart.
Right, it wouldn't make sense to anyone else. And I imagine the final layer isn't even in the code at all. It has to be the legal paperwork, right? The contracts.
Exactly right. The legal artifact itself assigns ownership, dictates liability, and actively restricts reuse. The contractual specificity often outlasts all the technical specificity.
So even if the tech could be reused.
Right. Even if you somehow built a system that another company could use, your contract almost certainly forbids you from selling it to them.
This brings up an incredible contradiction. In the tech world, the entire economic magic of software, the reason Silicon Valley exists and tech companies are worth trillions of dollars, is that once a piece of software is written, making a second copy costs $0.
Yeah, zero marginal cost.
Right. If a tailor sells 3 suits, they have to buy cloth and labor 3 times. If a software firm sells 3 million licenses, they just duplicate a file.
That near zero marginal cost of reproduction is literally the economic engine of every great software fortune in history.
But this bespoke industry intentionally throws that magic away.
Yep, they just toss it out.
By definition, they forfeit the zero marginal cost superpower. Because, as we just established with the tailor analogy, the demand for a second copy of a bespoke system is exactly zero. No one else wants it.
Exactly zero.
So, if software's greatest strength is scaling infinitely, why would anyone intentionally build a business model that throws that strength in the trash?
Yeah.
Why not just build generic products and get rich?
It's a fascinating paradox. I mean, a bespoke firm earns money linearly based on the effort it sells. It operates a lot more like a law firm or a high-end accounting practice.
Hours.
Right. It sells human hours. It does not decouple its revenue from its time. The reason firms do this is because unlocking that scalable side of software, turning a custom build into a universal product, requires generalization.
Right.
You would have to deliberately re-engineer the software to remove all of those specific client measurements you just got paid to put in.
I'd have to strip out my Tuesday discount rule, tear out the integration to my 1998 warehouse database, and replace them with universal settings that anyone could configure.
And that is real, highly expensive engineering work. It requires massive upfront capital.
Oh, I see.
Bespoke development, on the other hand, is cash flow positive from day one. The client pays your invoices every month while you build. You don't take on the venture capital risk of building something nobody wants because the single buyer has already agreed to pay for it.
Okay, I see the appeal for the vendor. It's a safe, steady cash flow.
Sure.
But flip that around to the buyer.
Okay.
If I am the CEO of a mid-sized company and a custom fit is this expensive and the system's going to be so rigid that it only works for me right now, why would I ever buy bespoke software?
It's a fair question.
Right. Why wouldn't I just buy something generic off the shelf? Or, if the software is that critical to my survival, just hire my own permanent internal developers.
To understand the buyer's motivation, we have to look at the very specific economic habitat where the bespoke market thrives. It exists in a narrow gap between buying a generic product and hiring a permanent team. Yeah. If we look at the history of economics, Ronald Coase won a Nobel Prize for asking a very simple question. Why do firms perform any activity internally instead of just buying it on the open market?
Meaning, like, why does a company bother having an internal HR department or an internal legal team instead of just hiring an external HR consultant or a law firm every time they need to hire someone or review a contract?
Exactly. And Coase's answer was that relying on open markets carries transaction costs.
Okay.
Every time you buy something outside, you have to search for a vendor, specify exactly what you want, negotiate a price, write a contract, and then enforce that contract if things go wrong.
Which is exhausting.
Right. But doing things internally carries governance costs. You have management overhead, office politics, employee benefits, and the risk of building a bloated bureaucracy.
So work naturally flows to whichever setup is cheaper. If the transaction costs of hiring freelancers every day are too high, you just bring the work in-house.
You got it. Later, another economist named Oliver Williamson sharpened this idea by introducing a decisive variable called asset specificity.
Asset specificity.
Okay. This measures how specific an investment is to one particular transaction. If an asset, whether it's a machine, a piece of software, or even human knowledge, is highly specific to one relationship, its value plummets if you try to use it anywhere else.
Okay, let me try to ground this.
Sure.
If I build a massive $100 million factory right next to a very specific type of coal mine, because my factory only runs on their unique coal, I have created a highly specific asset.
Yes.
The transaction cost of buying coal from them is low initially, but I've created a massive risk. The coal mine owner can wake up tomorrow and double their prices because they know I can't just pick up my factory and move it across the country.
Spot on. You are describing hold-up risk. Because you are locked in, they can hold you hostage and renegotiate the terms in their favor.
Oh, that sounds bad.
It is. Now, apply this entire framework to how companies acquire software. You end up with three distinct regimes. Regime one is low specificity. Think about word processing, email, or basic ledger accounting.
Right.
Thousands of organizations share the exact same need. The transaction costs of buying this on the market are tiny.
You just swipe a credit card and buy Microsoft Word or standard accounting software. No rational buyer today would commission a custom-built word processor just for their employees.
Exactly. It would be insane. Now look at the opposite pole. Regime two is extreme specificity combined with a permanent need.
Okay, permanent need.
This is when the software is the actual core of the business, and it has to evolve every single day. Think of a ride-sharing company's dispatch algorithm or a massive streaming service's recommendation engine.
Oh, right. If a ride-sharing company tried to outsource their core dispatch algorithm to a random dev shop, they'd be destroyed.
Complete.
They'd have to write a new contract every time they wanted to tweak the pricing model.
Yeah.
The transaction costs would be astronomical. So for that, they hire a standing army of internal engineers. They eat the governance costs because they have to.
Exactly. So where does bespoke software fit? It fits in regime three. High specificity, but a bounded intermittent need. It sits right in that gap.
Give me an example.
Imagine a mid-sized regional logistics company. They need a custom routing system fitted specifically to their weird network of regional depots and local union rules. It is way too unique to solve with off-the-shelf software.
But they only need to build it once.
Right.
It might take 9 months to build, and after that, they just need someone to keep the servers running and fix a bug every few months. It would be insane for a mid-sized trucking company to hire 20 permanent, expensive software engineers, give them full benefits, and then have them sit around doing nothing for years once the system is finished.
Exactly. They are trapped between the two obvious choices. Too custom for a generic product, but too temporary to justify an in-house engineering department. That gap is the sole habitat of the bespoke software industry, and it explains all the tension and friction we see in these business relationships.
It's like they're handcuffed together. The vendor is building something that has no other buyer, so they're entirely dependent on this one client's ability to pay.
Yep.
Meanwhile, the client is getting a system that embodies deep knowledge that only the vendor holds, leaving the client exposed to the vendor's competence and honesty. A bespoke contract is essentially a massive bilateral dependency being managed in slow motion.
That slow motion dependency is exactly what they are managing. And once a company realizes they are in this gap and they need to hire a vendor, they have to decide exactly what kind of engagement they are actually buying.
Right.
A software development firm sells its services in one of two completely different structural forms. Buyers constantly confuse them, and that confusion is the source of countless lawsuits and blown budgets.
This is where corporate money literally gets set on fire, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's break down the two models. Project outsourcing versus staff augmentation. If I am the buyer, what am I getting with project outsourcing?
With project outsourcing, you are buying a defined outcome at a quoted price and on a quoted schedule.
Okay.
The vendor directs their own people, they choose their own working methods, their own tools, and they essentially warrant a finished result. Crucially, the estimation risk sits entirely with the vendor. They provided the fixed price based on their own assessment of the scope.
So it's like buying a finished house. I go to a builder and say, I want a 3-bedroom house on this lot by November 1st, and I will pay you $500,000.
Exactly.
I don't care what brand of hammers the builders use. I don't care if they take a 2-hour lunch break or work weekends. I just want the keys on November 1st.
Yeah.
If the builder underestimated how hard it would be to pour the foundation and they have to work overtime, that eats into their profit margin, not my wallet.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with staff augmentation. In this model, the vendor is not selling an outcome. They are selling capacity.
Capacity, meaning people.
Yeah, they are selling you the time of named engineers billed by the hour, the day, or the month. These engineers sit inside your client teams, they work in your ticketing systems, they attend your daily meetings.
So I'm not buying a house. I am renting construction workers by the hour.
Yes. And because you are renting them, you direct their work. You set the priorities every week, and therefore the estimation risk sits completely with you, the client.
Because no one promised me a finished house.
Right. No one promised you a finished deliverable at a set price. You just bought hours of labor.
There's a fundamental rule here that makes so much sense when you hear it, but people ignore it constantly.
Yeah.
Direction and risk must move together.
Yes, say that again. It's so important.
Direction and risk must move together. If the vendor carries the financial risk of a fixed price, the vendor gets to direct the work. If the client directs the work and changes their mind every day, the client has to carry the cost overrun risk.
Ignoring that rule is the single most common pathology in bespoke contracting. Clients constantly demand what they think is a hybrid model. Yeah, they want a fixed price contract, which pushes all the financial risk onto the vendor, but then they want to retain the power to change priorities, direct the developers daily, and pivot the project halfway through.
It's the ultimate have your cake and eat it too delusion.
It really is.
It's like hiring a chef for a flat $100 rate to bake a cake for your party. You've transferred the financial risk to the chef, but halfway through the afternoon you walk into the kitchen and say, actually, I changed my mind. I don't want cake. I want you to make steak instead. Oh, and I'm still only paying you that original $100 and I still need it in an hour.
Right. The chef is going to lose their mind, lose money, and probably just walk out.
You simply cannot micromanage the day-to-day priorities if you aren't holding the financial risk of that changing scope.
Exactly. When a vendor accidentally sells a fixed price project to a client who actually intends to manage it, like staff augmentation, you don't get a successful software launch, you get a lawsuit.
Yeah. Wow. Now, if a company does realize they need flexibility, they know their scope is going to change, so they do the right thing and go the staff augmentation route. Buying human capacity by the hour, it suddenly matters very much where those humans are physically sitting.
Oh, geography's everything here.
Which brings us to a huge misconception in the corporate world. The illusion of cheap labor and the geographic landed cost of software engineering.
This is a mathematical reality that corporate procurement departments get wrong with alarming frequency.
How so?
When you are buying capacity by the hour, the physical and temporal location of those engineers is a massive commercial variable. The industry generally divides this into 3 sourcing geographies. First, onshore.
Yeah.
The engineers live in the client's own country.
Template.
Second, nearshore. The engineers are in a nearby country, sharing most of the working day and usually having strong cultural and linguistic proximity. Think of a company in Chicago hiring a team in Mexico or Colombia. And third, offshore. Engineers located in a distant country with little to no overlap in working hours, like a U.S. company hiring in India or Eastern Europe.
And obviously, the hourly rates for these 3 geographies are wildly different. Procurement departments absolutely love staring at spreadsheets full of what they call the rate card.
They do, and it is a total trap. The rate card is just the visible variable. What a buyer actually pays at the end of the project is not the rate card. They pay the landed cost.
The landed cost. Okay, break that down for me.
The landed cost is the hourly rate multiplied by the total hours actually consumed, plus the buyer's own internal management effort, plus the intensive knowledge transfer that a remote team requires before they can write a single useful line of code.
I mean, think about your own job for a second. If you're managing people on the other side of the planet, you aren't just paying their salary. You are paying with your own time, your own late nights, your own frustration. Let's run a scenario to prove how this math completely flips when you account for human behavior. Let's say you are a VP of engineering. You have a project that should take 2,000 hours of work. You get 3 quotes. The onshore local team charges $85 an hour. The nearshore team in South America charges $45 an hour. The offshore team in Asia charges $30 an hour.
If you are an executive looking only at the rate card, the decision seems incredibly obvious.
Right.
The offshore option at $30 an hour times 2,000 hours is $60,000. The onshore option at $85 an hour is $170,000. On paper, going offshore saves you $110,000, which is a massive 65% discount.
It looks like a huge win. You take that to the CEO and you look at the genius, but then reality hits. Let's calculate the true landed cost, starting with how physical distance and time zones artificially inflate the amount of time the work actually takes.
This is key. Distance inflates hours because specification gaps take longer to close.
What do you mean?
Software development is constant problem solving. In an onshore co-located team, a developer hits a blocker, walks down the corridor, asks you a 5-minute question, gets the answer, and goes back to typing.
But offshore, with the 12-hour time difference, that 5-minute question becomes a Slack message sent at 5:00 p.m. your time. The offshore developer sees it hours later while you were sleeping.
Right.
They realize your answer was vague, so they ask a clarifying question.
Yeah.
You wake up, see their question, and answer it. But now they are sleeping. A 5-minute conversation just became a 48-hour latency loop where no actual coding got done.
Exactly. And because of these latency loops, the project physically takes more hours to complete. Industry baselines often assume a 35% inflation in total hours for offshore work and about a 15% inflation for nearshore work.
Okay, let me do the math here.
Yeah.
So that 2,000-hour project is now going to consume 2,700 billable hours offshore and 2,300 hours nearshore. Okay, so the invoice is getting bigger, but $30 an hour is still cheap. But here comes the killer, hidden cost. Your own internal management time. Distance and cultural gaps consume massive amounts of coordination effort.
Huge amounts. Let's assume the offshore team requires 400 hours of intensive coordination from your internal managers, plus another 150 hours of deep knowledge transfer, just to explain the nuances of your business to a team that has never seen your operations.
That's a lot of time.
It is. That is 550 hours of your own team's time. And to calculate the true cost, we have to value your internal team's time at that premium onshore rate of $85 an hour.
Ouch! This is where the offshore illusion collapses. Let's look at the final bill for all 3 options.
Okay, let's hear it.
The onshore option is just the flat 2,000 hours at $85. Total cost, $170,000.
Right.
You didn't need any extra management overhead because they sit in your office and already know the business.
Yeah.
Now look at offshore. You are paying for 2,700 inflated hours at $30, which is an $81,000 vendor invoice. But then you have to add the 550 hours of your own internal management time, valued at $85 an hour. That is $46,750 in hidden internal costs. Your total landed cost for the cheap offshore option is suddenly $127,750.
It's creeping up.
It really is. Finally, let's look at the nearshore option in the same time zone. 2,300 slightly inflated hours at $45 is $103,500 on the invoice. Because they share your workday, they need much less coordination, let's say 150 hours of your internal time at $85, which is $12,750. The total landed cost for nearshore is $116,250.
And there it is. The order entirely inverts. The nearshore option, which quoted a rate 50% higher than offshore on the rate card, $45 versus $30, actually ends up being cheaper overall.
By over $10,000. Decisions made on the rate card alone are literally decisions made on the smallest term in the economic equation. You aren't factoring in the latency penalty or your own sweat equity.
You can actually calculate the exact break-even point for these engagements. The offshore savings completely vanish once the buyer-side coordination reaches about half the size of the original project.
Wow.
Yeah, if your internal managers have to spend more than 1,000 hours managing a 2,000-hour offshore project, you are actively losing money compared to just hiring the most expensive local team in your own city.
Which completely explains the massive boom in nearshore development agencies. They aren't trying to compete by being the absolute cheapest. They know they can't beat a $30 rate card.
Exactly.
But they're actually selling to a stressed-out VP of engineering is the removal of internal coordination headaches. They're selling shared working hours, the ability to jump on a Zoom call at 11 a.m. instead of midnight.
Yes.
And enough cultural proximity that when a developer says, I'll look into it, whether that means I'm on it or I am completely stuck and terrified to admit it.
That nuance is priceless. They sell a reduction of the landed cost. But regardless of where the team is physically sitting, before anyone writes a single line of code, the client and the vendor have to agree on what exactly they are building.
Oh, the intake phase.
Right. And this intake phase is where the most expensive, invisible premium in all of software development hides.
Let's talk about pricing the unknown, or what we can call the ambiguity premium. Think about how clients actually ask for software. It varies wildly, right? I've been the guy asking for features, and sometimes I know exactly what I want, and sometimes I barely have an idea.
The spectrum of requirement quality is incredibly wide. At one extreme, you have a client whose specification approaches pseudocode.
Pseudocode.
Yeah, they hand the vendor a massive document with numbered behaviors, enumerated edge cases, attached data dictionaries, and explicit criteria for what constitutes success.
That sounds like an absolute dream for a developer. But I imagine it's very rare.
Very rare. It usually only comes from highly experienced, repeat corporate buyers. The other extreme is much, much more common. The napkin.
The literal napkin.
The client slides a piece of paper across the conference table with a single sentence on it. We need a secure portal for our distributors.
And the problem is, a single sentence hides a million decisions. Do the distributors have different pricing tiers? Can they see inventory levels in real time? Does the portal need to calculate multi-state shipping taxes? Are we supporting international users?
Exactly. This is a crucial information theoretic point. Information that is missing from a napkin cannot simply be guessed by a smart programmer.
Right.
It cannot be magicked into existence by an AI tool. The information literally does not exist anywhere in the universe yet. The rules haven't been decided. Therefore, the information has to be manufactured.
And manufacturing that information requires expensive, structured meetings, interviews, prototyping, flying people out to observe how the client's current messy process actually works on the warehouse floor. The requirement is a joint product of the client and the vendor.
And for the business of the vendor, this matters deeply because ambiguity represents variance. And in economics, variance has a very specific price. A vendor quoting a fixed price to build a system cannot price that system at the average expected time.
Wait, why not? If I've built 10 distributor portals, and on average they take 500 hours, why can't I just quote 500 hours?
Because if you price at the mean average, simple statistics dictate you will lose money on half of your projects.
Right.
Half of them will inevitably take 600 or 700 hours due to unforeseen complexities. If you eat those losses under a fixed price contract, you will go bankrupt. Therefore, rational vendors price at a high percentile of risk, usually the 90th percentile of expected effort. The fixed price rises as ambiguity rises, even if the core software is ultimately the same.
Meaning the client literally pays a massive premium for their own vagueness, whether the vendor explicitly shows them that charge or not. Let's ground this with a scenario.
Okay, let's hear it.
Two different clients come to a vendor requesting functionally identical distributor portals. Based on past work, the true expected average effort is 500 hours for both.
Right.
Client A supplies that rigorous, perfect specification you mentioned. Because there is so little unknown, the variance is very tight. The vendor calculates the 90th percentile worst-case scenario at 550 hours.
Okay, 550 hours for the prepared client. Now, client B comes in with the napkin.
Yes. 3 vague paragraphs of intent. The system they actually need is fundamentally the same as client A's, but the unknown variance is massive. Those unstated decisions might require huge architectural rewrites halfway through, so the vendor calculates the 90th percentile for the napkin at 800 hours.
Wow. Now apply a standard rate of $50 an hour. Client A's quote is 550 hours times $50, which is $27,500. Client B's quote is 800 hours times $50, which is $40,000.
Client B is paying 45% more, an extra $12,500 for the exact same expected system, simply to cover the massive risk variance of their own napkin. If I'm client B and I find out I'm paying a $12,000 vagueness tax, I'm going to be furious.
Which is why mature, sophisticated vendors refuse to put a fixed bid on a napkin. It's just bad business. Instead, they sell a solution, a paid discovery phase.
Oh, this is brilliant. Let's walk through how this saves money. The vendor says to client B, I can't give you a fixed quote on this napkin, but I will sell you a 2-week discovery workshop for $6,000. We will do the elicitation, build some wireframes, and write a rigorous technical scope.
Right.
Client B grumbles, but they pay the $6,000. But what they just did was convert their vague napkin into client A's rigorous specification.
Exactly. And once they have that rigorous spec, the vendor can now quote the actual build at the tighter 550 hours, which is $27,500.
Let's do the math on the savings. Client B's total cost is now the $6,000 discovery plus the $27,500.
Yeah.
By spending $6,000 up front on planning. They dropped their final price from $40,000 down to $33,500. They literally saved $6,500 by removing their own ambiguity. The planning phase more than paid for itself.
It is phenomenal business logic, and it leads directly to the creation of the formal proposal document. Now, a lot of people think a proposal is just slick paperwork that a sales guy throws together. But in bespoke development, the proposal is actual engineering work.
Because the proposal defines the boundary of the system. I imagine the most consequential part of the proposal isn't the price tag at the bottom. It is the list of assumptions attached to it.
Yes, the assumptions list is the explicit record of every single ambiguity the vendor had to resolve in its own favor in order to be able to quote a fixed price at all.
Right. You read these contracts, and they are full of bullet points like, assumes the client provides clean test data by week 2, or assumes single country tax rules, assumes the legacy database supports modern API calls. Every one of those assumptions is a fence built around that fixed price.
If reality ends up falling outside of that fence, if it turns out 3 weeks later that they actually need multi-country European tax rules, well, that change is billable outside the fixed price.
Gotcha.
The assumptions list is where ambiguity goes to be named and quantified. When you look at catastrophic lawsuits over bespoke projects, they are almost always fights over ambiguities that nobody bothered to write down in the assumptions list.
Which brings us perfectly to the ultimate question of risk allocation. The billing models themselves. Once the proposal is done, the contract has to be signed. And the two main billing models, fixed price versus time and materials, are not just pricing strategies, right? You described them earlier as opposite insurance policies.
They absolutely are.
Let's dive deep into this because this is where companies make existential bets.
Okay, so every bespoke contract must answer one fundamental question. Is the client buying an outcome at a fixed price, or are they buying effort at a variable rate? Let's look at fixed price first.
Okay.
The vendor commits to a defined deliverable for a defined sum. The client is buying budget certainty. They know exactly what they will spend. But any estimation error lands directly on the vendor's profit margin. The vendor is entirely underwriting its own estimate.
And as we know, estimating novel software is reliably error-prone. You always find hidden complexity once you start coding. Any scope change under a fixed price contract requires a formal, painful renegotiation, usually called a change order.
And everyone hates change orders.
Everyone.
Conversely, we have time and materials, or T&M. The client pays an agreed hourly or daily rate for effort actually delivered. The scope can evolve freely. The client can change their mind daily, but the estimation risk has shifted completely.
To the client.
Right. The client now bears the risk that the final bill spirals out of control with no contractual ceiling.
Let's run a hypothetical to show just how brutal this difference is depending on which side of the table you're sitting on. Let's say a vendor estimates a project at 1,000 hours of work. The vendor's internal cost for their developers, salary, office space, health insurance is $40 per hour.
Okay. Standard margins.
When they do fixed bids, they add a 25% markup for profit. So they quote the client,
What?
1,000 hours times their $40 cost, plus the 25% markup. The fixed price quote is $50,000.
But then reality hits. The project overruns. It turns out the client's ancient database is a total nightmare to connect to. The project actually consumes 1,300 hours to finish. Let's look at the financial fallout under a fixed price contract.
The vendor's actual delivery cost is 1,300 hours times their $40 internal cost. That equals $52,000 in raw expenses. But the client is legally only paying the fixed $50,000 quote.
Woof.
The vendor literally loses $2,000 in hard cash on a contract they originally thought would yield a healthy profit. The unforeseen complexity devoured their entire 25% markup and then some.
Now imagine that exact same 1,300-hour overrun under a time and materials contract, where the vendor is billing the client at an hourly rate of $50.
Oh man. The client has to pay for all 1,300 hours at $50 an hour. The client's bill balloons from an expected $50,000 to $65,000.
Right.
That is 30% higher than they budgeted for. The client is furious. They have to go back to their board for more money. It's a disaster for them.
But the vendor.
The vendor is thrilled. The vendor earns $10 of pure profit on every single one of those 1,300 hours. The vendor makes $13,000 in pure profit. completely untouched by the overrun.
And if you run the mirror case where the project finishes early in only 800 hours, the transfer of wealth reverses. The fixed price vendor keeps a massive margin on 200 hours they never even had to work, while the T&M client happily pockets the savings from the underrun. They truly are opposite insurance policies against the unknown.
So how do companies actually choose between them? Is there some rigorous economic risk theory that dictates which one to use?
Rarely. What is fascinating about this industry is that the choice is usually dictated entirely by stakeholder psychology.
Psychology.
Yeah, chief financial officers, CFOs, exhibit a profound psychological preference for bounded commitments. They demand fixed price contracts because a fixed price can be budgeted for the fiscal year, approved once, and defended to a board of directors.
That makes sense from a finance perspective.
Right. An open-ended T&M rate invites the terrifying question, then when does the spending end? The CFO just cannot tolerate that uncertainty.
But on the other side of the building, the engineering realities push the exact opposite way. Engineers know that software is inherently unknowable upfront. Evolving scope fits modern, agile, iterative delivery perfectly.
Exactly.
Engineers demand T&M because forcing a fixed bid onto a vague, ambitious software project is just writing a fiction that everyone pretends to believe until they inevitably end up in a lawsuit.
Because the signature psychology of the CFO usually controls the checkbook, the industry has evolved hybrid billing models. Their entire purpose is to make honest, iterative engineering look like a bounded financial commitment to appease CFO.
Like phase-gated fixed pricing. You slice the project up and only fix the price of phase 2 after phase 1 resolves all the unknowns.
Yep.
Or cap time and materials, where it's hourly billing but with a hard contractual ceiling, giving the CFO a maximum worst-case scenario they can sign off on.
Exactly. But ultimately, despite all the contract friction, eventually the code gets written, the system ships, the invoice clears. But here is the secret of the bespoke industry. Delivery is not a finish line. Delivery is a fork in the road.
A fork in the road. Let's look at the aftermath. Once that first project is delivered, the relationship between the vendor and the client takes one of 4 distinct branches. And if you were running a dev agency, you have to know which branch you are on, or you will price yourself right out of business. Let's walk through them. Branch 1 is the dream scenario, right?
Branch 1 is the growth loop. The delivered system is a massive success, and it immediately generates demand for its own successors. The client wants a phase 2, they want new modules, they want a permanent maintenance retainer. Economically, this is phenomenal for the vendor.
Because the customer acquisition costs are completely sunk. Finding a major corporate client, surviving their grueling procurement vetting, learning all their weird domain logic that costs the vendor tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid sales time. In a growth loop, you only pay that tax once. Every subsequent project rides on that sunk investment, so the vendor's profit margins characteristically rise over the life of the relationship, even if their hourly prices stay completely flat.
Then you have branch 2, which is the clean one-shot. Some business needs genuinely exhaust themselves in one single delivery.
Like what?
A temporary marketing site for a specific global event, a one-time data migration between 2 old systems, maybe a specific regulatory compliance tool. It serves its purpose and it ends cleanly.
But the danger here is mispricing it. If I'm a vendor, and I assume I'm getting a growth loop, I might underprice the first project just to win the client.
And that is fatal. The vendor must recognize a one-shot engagement during the intake phase, because if a one-shot will never amortize its high acquisition cost across future projects, the initial price must be set significantly higher to cover that entire acquisition cost on its own.
Right.
A firm that sells a one-shot at the same tight margin it uses to open a 10-year growth loop will actively lose money.
Okay, branch 3 is where the psychology gets a bit dark. It's called absorption, and it's the dark side of success.
It looks like incredible success for years. A growth loop with one massive anchor client grows so much that it consumes 100% of the vendor's engineering capacity.
So they just stop taking other work.
Yeah, the vendor stops marketing, they stop selling to new clients because they have no free engineers to put on new projects anyway. The vendor's engineers sit in the client's meetings, use the client's Slack, absorb the client's culture.
The vendor essentially becomes an in-house department for the client, but the client doesn't have to pay for any of the legal employment benefits, and the vendor's still carrying all the entrepreneurial risk of running an independent business.
The final stage of absorption is usually literal. The client realizes these excellent engineers already work exclusively on their code, so they just poach them away one by one.
Ouch.
Or they acquire the vendor's entire team wholesale for a fraction of what a real tech acquisition should cost. the vendor's owners accidentally traded a diversified, independent firm for a slow, severance-free dissolution.
That is a terrifying trap to fall into without realizing it. And then there's branch 4, the absolute rarest branch, the productization pivot. This is taking that custom bespoke software and somehow turning it into a universal product that you can sell to hundreds of companies.
A holy grail.
Exactly. We're going to dedicate a whole section to that later because it's so important. But what ties all these branches together is a crucial insight. For the vendor, the code isn't the asset. The relationship is the asset.
This brings us to a concept we can call the client portfolio balance sheet. A bespoke firm's true balance sheet is its set of living client relationships. Think about a salaried employee. They get a smooth, predictable paycheck every 2 weeks.
Right, nice and steady.
But a bespoke firm's revenue is incredibly lumpy. It arrives engagement by engagement, and because corporate software projects are so large relative to the firm's size, a 12-person development agency might literally live or die on just 4 clients.
This lumpy revenue stacked against a fixed, relentless payroll creates existential financial risks. Let's look at project concentration, specifically the immense danger of the anchor client.
We use a metric called revenue at risk. If a large share of your revenue depends on a single client, and there is a probability that client terminates the contract for reasons completely outside your control, like they get acquired by a bigger company or their industry crashes, your expected loss is massive.
And it happens fast, right?
Much faster than you can fire people to shed your payroll costs.
Let's run the numbers on an agency owner's worst nightmare. Imagine a vendor making $1.5 million a year in revenue. They have one massive, long-standing anchor client that accounts for 70% of that revenue. So $1.05 million comes from this one single client.
Okay.
4 smaller clients make up the rest. The firm's annual payroll, rent, and costs are $1.2 million. So they have a $300,000 profit, a very healthy 20% margin. The owners think they are absolute geniuses crushing the market.
Until the anchor client is acquired by a multinational conglomerate. The acquiring company already has its own tech platforms and its own preferred global vendor list. They send a polite email canceling the contract.
Stuff like that.
Just like that. This wasn't a failure of engineering. The vendor did great work. The growth loop was severed by a corporate event in another city that they couldn't possibly influence.
What happens to the dev shop the next morning?
Their post-termination revenue instantly drops to just the $450,000 they make from the small clients, but their cost base is unchanged at $1.2 million.
Oh, no.
They were instantaneously running an operating shortfall of $750,000 a year, or $62,500 every single month. If they have $250,000 in cash reserves in the bank, the firm is completely insolvent and bankrupt in exactly 4 months.
4 months. It takes longer than 4 months to prospect, pitch, and win a single new corporate client from scratch. Let me translate what this means for the vendor. You described this earlier as concentration asymmetry, meaning if the client goes bankrupt, your dev shop dies right alongside them. You are taking on the equity-like risk of a startup founder.
Right.
But your upside is capped at your boring $50 an hour wage. You aren't getting stock options if the client becomes a billion-dollar unicorn.
That is the asymmetry. Equity-level downside exposure for hourly rate rewards.
Yeah.
The only way to hedge against that structural vulnerability is relentless portfolio diversification.
You just have to keep selling.
Diversification isn't just a nice-to-have management theory. It is a literal survival tax that you must pay by constantly selling and pitching new clients, even when your engineering team is at 100% capacity and you have no one to do the work.
And speaking of capacity, let's switch gears from project work to staff augmentation, because the portfolio map there is even more brutal. In augmentation, where you are just renting out seats, the entire business turns on a single highly sensitive metric: staffing utilization.
Utilization is simply the fraction of your paid engineering capacity that you actually manage to bill to a client. Because remember, you have to pay the engineer's salary whether they are placed on a lucrative client project or sitting on the bench in your office waiting for the sales team to find them work.
Let's look at how sensitive this leverage is. Imagine a firm employs 10 engineers. The fully loaded cost salary, benefits, laptop, overhead is $28 per hour per engineer. The firm places them at clients for $45 an hour.
Pretty standard.
At 100% utilization, meaning everyone is billing 160 hours a month, the firm makes $72,000 in revenue against $44,800 in costs. That is a profit of $27,200, a fantastic 37% margin.
But 100% utilization is a spreadsheet fantasy. Projects end, there are notice periods, there are gaps between placements, people get sick, people take vacation. Let's say utilization drops just 15 percentage points down to 85%.
At 85% utilization, the revenue falls to $61,200. But the cost base, the fixed salaries, does not move one single cent. It stays at $44,800. The profit shrinks instantly to $16,400.
Wow.
A 15% fall in utilization literally wipes out 40% of the firm's total profit.
And the break-even point arrives shockingly fast, usually at around 62%. A staffing firm operating below roughly two-thirds utilization is literally paying for the privilege of employing people. The distance between comfortable profit and insolvency is about 20 percentage points.
So what does this all mean for the people running these businesses? It means that staffing firms' biggest threat isn't a bad line of code. Its biggest threat is a 30-day notice period.
Exactly.
If a major client terminates a 12-seat account, they remove 12 salaries worth of revenue in 30 days, but those 12 salaries remain payable by the vendor. And unlike a fixed-price project where there might be a partially completed deliverable to finish and invoice to soften the blow, in augmentation, it's just an immediate cliff.
And when those abrupt breakups happen, when the client pulls the plug or the vendor tries to walk away, it usually reveals catastrophic oversights in the contracts.
Which brings us to the battlefield of ownership, intellectual property, hostage code, and liability. This is where human intuition fails completely. Think about it. If I commissioned a custom app for my company, my intuition's a client is. I paid you $500,000 to build this. I told you what it should do. Therefore, it is mine. Every single line of code belongs to me.
Right, that's what everyone thinks.
But the vendor's intuition is, I wrote it. It's my craft. I use my proprietary tools and 10 years of experience to build it efficiently.
And the law, in most jurisdictions, refuses to pick a default winner that perfectly satisfies both parties. The only reliable rule in this field is ownership of a bespoke system is whatever the contract explicitly says it is. And silence in a contract is not a neutral outcome. It is just a deferred, incredibly expensive dispute.
Let's talk about the pathological outcomes when ownership is handled badly. First up, hostage code. This sounds like a thriller movie. This is where the vendor retains ownership of the source code and uses it as leverage over a captive client.
This happens far more often than you'd think. Consider a mid-sized retail bank that hired a vendor to build their mobile banking app. A decade passes. The app is now business critical, moving millions of dollars a day.
Okay.
The bank wants a massive upgrade and, per their governance rules, asks for competitive bids from other vendors to make sure they're getting a fair price.
But they discover they are trapped. The original contract, signed in a hurry 10 years ago by an executive who didn't understand software, left the source code ownership with the incumbent vendor. The bank only got a license to use the software.
Yep.
No other bidder can touch code they aren't legally allowed to see or modify. The incumbent vendor flatly refuses to release the source code to their competitors.
The bank's options are reduced to two brutal choices. Either accept the incumbent vendor's highly inflated pricing indefinitely, or fund a massive, multi-million-dollar rebuild from scratch while keeping the old system running in parallel.
It's a nightmare.
The structural lesson here isn't that vendors are inherently evil. It's that a contract clause's price is lowest on signing day, and its leverage rises with every single line of code written under it.
Then you have something called lock-in by opacity. This is insidious. The client technically owns the code on paper, but the vendor delivers it completely undocumented.
Oh, that's the worst.
It can only be built on the vendor's specific proprietary servers, and all the institutional knowledge lives in the heads of two specific developers who work for the vendor. It's essentially hostage code wearing a mask of legal compliance.
To avoid these pathologies, professional contracts usually settle on a middle ground. The client owns the bespoke layer, the specific domain logic, the Tuesday discount rules, the integrations, everything they explicitly paid to have customized.
Right.
But the vendor retains ownership of and licenses their background IP, the pre-existing libraries, internal developer tools, and generic generators they reuse across all their clients.
That protects both sides. The client isn't a hostage, and the vendor isn't stripped of the basic tools they need to stay efficient.
But wait, hold on. What about open source?
Ah.
Modern software isn't written from scratch line by line. It's assembled from thousands of free building blocks. Almost all software uses open source components today.
This is the most brilliant trap in the entire legal framework. If a powerful corporate client bullies a small vendor into a heavy-handed contract that says the client shall exclusively own 100% of all source code delivered, that contract is literally impossible for the vendor to perform.
Because the vendor doesn't own the open source libraries inside the code, they can't assign ownership of something downloaded for free from the internet.
Exactly. Handling this requires a component schedule in the contract, explicitly listing the third-party open source libraries being included. And this looks like the most boring bureaucratic paperwork imaginable.
Until it isn't.
Until the day it allocates a disaster. Let's look at a real-world nightmare scenario, the Log4j vulnerability. Oh man, Log4j was everywhere. Let's say a vendor delivers a logistics platform under a bad contract that says client owns everything and completely ignores third-party components. Months later, a massive critical security vulnerability is discovered in Log4j, which happens to be a ubiquitous open source logging library buried deep inside the platform the vendor built.
Right.
Hackers start attacking the client systems. It's a full-blown catastrophe.
Now, the unallocated question detonates: who is liable for fixing it? The client screams that the vendor chose the components silently and warranted the system to be secure, demanding an immediate, free emergency fix.
But the vendor pushes back. They say, wait a minute, you forced a contract saying you own the entire system, you've owned it for a year, we don't have a maintenance contract in place, and we didn't even write that open source library. It was a global industry standard when we used it.
Both parties have a technically valid argument, which means they are headed to court. The contract failed to allocate the risk of a third-party component.
So how should they have done it?
A proper contract would have required a disclosed component inventory upfront, a defined 90-day window for security patches, and explicitly stated that beyond that window, open source risk belongs entirely to the client unless they buy an ongoing support contract.
It perfectly explains why large corporate buyers force small dev shops through months of agonizing security questionnaires and legal review. They've been burned by this exact scenario. They know a bespoke system is a decades-long dependency that can blow up an executive's career in an afternoon.
Without a doubt.
Now, before we move on, how does ownership work in staff augmentation? It must be totally different because the engineers are working directly inside the client's own systems.
It is entirely inverted. In augmentation, the rented engineer commits code directly into the client's repositories every day. The client owns that output by default. The vendor only has to worry about carving out their background IP.
Okay, that sounds easier.
It is, but augmentation introduces a completely different set of terrifying legal risks, specifically co-employment and permanent establishment risks.
Meaning, if I rent an engineer from you for 2 years, and I dictate their daily tasks, I tell them what hours to work, and I invite them to the company holiday party, a local labor board might eventually rule that I am their actual employer, not you.
Yep.
And suddenly my company is on the hook for their severance, health benefits, and statutory protections.
Yes. Or if that rented engineer lives in a foreign country, the tax authorities in that country might rule that their daily work for you creates a permanent establishment for your corporation in their jurisdiction.
Oh, wow.
That triggers massive corporate tax liabilities you never budgeted for. You have to draft the augmentation contract incredibly carefully to maintain the vendor as the sole employer of record.
And then there's the issue of the conversion fee or the buyout fee. Because if I rent a great engineer for 2 years, I might just want to hire them permanently away from the vendor.
And vendors misprice this constantly. Imagine a vendor is making a monthly profit margin of $2,720 on an augmented engineer. After a year, the client loves the engineer, wants to hire them directly, and invokes a standard recruiting industry conversion fee, 25% of the engineer's first year salary.
Okay, let's say at a $42,000 base salary, the buyout fee is $10,500. The vendor takes the check and thinks they did well.
But did they? If that placement was expected to continue for another 18 months, the vendor just voluntarily forfeited 18 months of that $2,720 monthly profit.
Well, let me multiply that out. That's nearly $49,000 in lost future profit.
Exactly. The $10,500 fee only recovers about 21% of the loss, and they lost a fully trained engineer.
Which is why sophisticated vendors must index conversion fees to the remaining expected term of the placement, not to the engineer's base salary. The economics you are protecting are an annuity stream, not a one-time headhunter placement fee.
Exactly right.
Which brings us to the ultimate dream of every dev shop owner. If building custom software is this fraught with holdup risks, concentration asymmetry, buyout fees, and liability traps, every vendor eventually dreams of escaping this trap. They want to turn a custom build into a universal product. This is the productization pivot.
It is the rarest and most difficult branch to successfully execute. escaping the bespoke paradox by finally unlocking that zero marginal cost magic. But it requires three strict preconditions.
What's the first one?
First, a clean legal position. If the original contract was work for hire, the client owns the software. Taking it and reselling it to their competitors isn't a pivot, it's intellectual property theft. You need vendor retained rights or explicit written consent.
Second, a generalizable domain. The rules built into the system have to be universal enough to apply to other companies. If the system is built entirely around one CEO's truly idiosyncratic, crazy internal process, it will never generalize into a product anyone else wants to buy.
And third, capital and stomach. Generalizing the code is a massive second build phase. You have to undertake it entirely at your own financial risk, with no client paying hourly invoices to fund the work. It is the exact inversion of the safe, cash flow, positive business model the firm is used to.
Let's tell the story of the restaurant system, because it illustrates this pivot beautifully. Picture two developers running a standard, stressful, bespoke dev shop.
Okay, picture them.
A friend of theirs who owns a bustling local restaurant hires them to build a custom operations system, inventory, table service, closing reports, tailored exactly to his kitchen's weird flow.
The developers build it, and the system works perfectly. The restaurant runs smoother than ever. And in year 3, one of the founders has a realization while walking down the street. Every single restaurant on this block has the exact same operational problems, and there is no affordable, modern product on the market solving them.
But they need that first precondition, the legal right to sell it. Because the original client was a friend, they sit down and negotiate an amazing trade. The developers ask for the full IP rights to resell the system.
And in exchange?
In exchange, they give the friend a permanent, free, lifetime license to the software, free upgrades forever, and a voice as the key reference customer.
Once they secured the legal consent, they faced the generalization labor. They spent a brutal year of unpaid nights fundamentally re-architecting the system. They had to turn hard-coded, bespoke rules into administered settings that any restaurant manager could tweak.
That's a ton of work.
They had to build a multi-tenant cloud architecture so different restaurants' data wouldn't mix. They had to replace the bespoke integration of the friend's specific accounting software with standard universal API interfaces. The founders admitted later that this generalization phase was actually harder and took longer than the original custom build.
And this brings up a crucial insight. A productization pivot is not an engineering project. It is a change of species for the entire company.
It truly is. Because once the product is built, you need functions a bespoke firm has never had to maintain. You need a dedicated customer support desk with service-level agreements owed to complete strangers who expect 204/7 uptime.
You can't just take the weekend off.
No. You need scalable release management so an update doesn't crash 50 restaurants on a Friday night. And above all, you need a sales function because you can't court 20 small $400 a month subscribers using the same slow, expensive golf course tactics you used to court one massive corporate anchor client.
And think about the psychology of product management. In the bespoke world, the client is always right because the client is your only source of revenue. If they want a weird button that makes no sense, you build it and you bill them for the hours.
Yep.
In a product company, you have to look a paying customer in the eye and say, no, we are not building that feature for you because it ruins the interface for our other 19 customers. That requires a complete rewiring of the founder's brain. You have to learn to say no.
But in this specific case, they succeeded. They hit 20 customers at $400 a month. It yielded a $72,000 annual annuity that arrived automatically every single month whether anyone billed an hour or not. They successfully transitioned from a high-stress service business to a scalable, high-margin product.
It's an incredible triumph. But it raises a massive, unavoidable modern question. If rewriting and generating come is the hard part of software economics, won't artificial intelligence just make all of this obsolete? Won't generative AI break the bespoke paradox entirely?
It is the most hotly debated topic in the industry right now.
Yeah.
The short answer is, AI changes the math of the transaction, but it does not repeal the fundamental laws of gravity in bespoke development.
How so?
Let's look at what actually changes. Generative AI drastically compresses the build phase. Code, automated tests, data migrations, they're all much faster to write. The fixed cost of the initial engineering drops significantly.
But what doesn't change? What can't AI fix?
Elicitation and accountability do not compress. An AI cannot extract information from a napkin that doesn't exist yet. The complex business decisions deferred by a vague client still have to be manufactured meeting by meeting, human to human.
Right. The AI doesn't know your business strategy.
Exactly. AI cannot decide what your company's refund policy should be. And crucially, an AI does not sign a contract. It does not hold liability for a security flaw. The human vendor still warrants the system and takes the legal risk.
And most importantly, AI does not fix the bespoke paradox itself. If an AI helps you build a custom inventory system 4 times faster for a specific client, that finished system is still fitted exclusively to that one client's specific integrations and bizarre business rules.
Still zero demand for a second copy.
Exactly. It is still worthless to everyone else. Faster, cheaper tailoring is still tailoring.
Which leads to a terrifying pricing crisis for vendors who are stuck billing by the hour. Imagine a vendor historically builds a specific reporting module in 240 hours. They bill the client at $50 an hour, so the total price is $12,000.
By tracking.
Now, the vendor adopts AI tooling. The exact same module now only takes 120 hours to build. If they continue to bill raw hours at their historical $50 rate, their revenue for that project just collapsed from $12,000 to $6,000.
Wow.
They delivered the exact same business value to the client, but they just cut their own top-line revenue in half.
The escape from this trap is arithmetic, not rhetoric.
Yeah.
You have to explicitly change your pricing model to split the productivity dividend with the client.
Right.
How does that actually work in practice?
Instead of billing 120 hours at $50, you move toward a fixed price model and price the final deliverable at, say, $9,000.
Okay, let's look at the psychology of that. At $9,000, the client is thrilled because they just saved 25% off the historical $12,000 price. It feels like a win.
A huge win for them.
But the vendor is thrilled too because they got paid $9,000 for only 120 hours of work. Their effective hourly rate just jumped from $50 to $75 an hour, a 50% increase in profitability, and they freed up 120 hours of engineering capacity to take on another project.
It ultimately forces vendors to stop hiding behind timesheets and admit a fundamental truth. The value was never in the hour of typing code. The value was always in the final business outcome.
That is the core realization. Though we should note that staffing augmentation vendors are highly exposed here. If you sell project outcomes, you can split the AI dividend.
Right.
But if your entire business model is just renting out human seats by the hour, and AI allows a client's 10-person internal team to do the work of 13 people, the client isn't going to generously pay a higher rate for those 10 people. They're just going to release 3 rented seats. Augmentation revenue is directly compressible by AI productivity shocks.
It's a huge vulnerability for those firms.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by looking at the custom measurements baked deep into the digital fabric of a code base, the domain logic and ancient integrations that make a system perfect for one company and totally useless to another.
We walked through the brutal realities of landed geographic costs, proving that cheap offshore rate cards are often just illusions masking massive internal coordination taxes and latency loops.
We looked at the extreme sensitivity of staffing utilization, where a tiny 15% drop in busyness wipes out almost half of a firm's profit. And we navigated the high-stakes battlefield of intellectual property, hostage code, and the absolute career-saving necessity of open-source component schedules.
It all points to one undeniable conclusion. A bespoke software firm's true balance sheet is not its code base. It is its portfolio of living, breathing, high-risk client relationships.
And that leaves us with a truly wild, provocative realization to end on. Think about this. If bespoke software isn't really just an engineering artifact, but rather a complex legal and economic relationship governing a slow-motion bilateral dependency,
Which it is.
then as artificial intelligence gets exponentially better at generating the actual code, maybe the true competitive advantage of the future isn't writing code at all. What happens to this multi-billion-dollar shadow industry when AI is used not just to write the software, but to dynamically negotiate the scope, price the ambiguity, and structure the legal risk in the contracts in real time?
That's the real frontier.
Will the AI become the lawyer, the estimator, and the developer all at once? That is definitely something for you to mull over the next time you use an internal corporate app that seems designed exclusively for your company's weird workflows. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for having me. It's been a fascinating exploration.